The 24th of April 1944, 24,000 feet above Brandenburg, Germany, the balance of air power tilts forever. Major Günther Rall, a veteran of countless dogfights, checks his fuel 15 minutes remain, while a new American intruder stays glued to his wing through a punishing dive. For 3 years, Rall and the Luftwaffe have lived by an iron law. American fighters cannot follow them home. They lack range, they lack high-altitude performance, and they burn fuel too quickly to linger. Yet today, a P-51 Mustang, powered by a Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, is still climbing, still turning, and still has fuel for another hour of combat plus the 600-mile return to England. The mathematics of air superiority, distance, altitude, endurance has flipped in a single morning. This moment crowns a chain of events set in motion the previous summer. On August 17, 1943, in raids on Schweinfurt and Regensburg, the US 8th Air Force lost around 60 B-17s in one day. German planners celebrated. Fighter General Adolf Galland calculated that by concentrating interceptors and waiting for short-legged escorts to turn back, each German pilot could trade one fighter for 10 highly trained bomber crewmen, an exchange rate that threatened the American campaign. The strategy peaked on October 14, 1943, Black Thursday, when another 60 bombers and 650 airmen were lost, forcing a 4-month pause in deep penetration missions. Geography and attrition seemed to guarantee the Luftwaffe's upper hand. But hidden from Berlin's confidence, an extraordinary convergence of engineering and mass production was already underway. In April 1940, North American Aviation accepted a British request for a new fighter and produced a prototype in just 102 days, flying it 149 days after contract signing, a design speed unmatched elsewhere. Early Allison-powered Mustangs performed well at low altitude, but faltered where bomber escorts were needed most, above 15,000 feet. The breakthrough came when Rolls-Royce test pilot Ronald Harker suggested fitting the airframe with the Merlin engine, and when the Packard Motor Company in Detroit applied American mass production methods to British precision engineering, producing hundreds of Merlins each month, each delivering about 1,650 horsepower at high altitude. By late 1943, the first P-51 Mustangs were ready, faster than a Bf-109G at 30,000 feet, capable of to 440 miles per hour, with a 42,000 feet service ceiling, 6 50 caliber machine guns, carrying 1,880 rounds, and a range of over 2,000 miles on drop tanks, twice that of any German fighter. Their laminar-flow wing, keeping smooth airflow across 60% of its chord, reduced drag by around 30%, giving them both speed and endurance. The shock came quickly. On December 1, 1943, veteran Focke-Wulf Fw 190, pilots of JG-2 attacked US bombers near Solingen, confident that escorts had turned back. Instead, 8 P-51Bs of the 354th Fighter Group, the Pioneer Mustang Group, remained on station, their drop tanks extending range far deeper than any previous Allied fighter. 12 days later, 16 Mustangs escorted bombers to Kiel, 420 miles from England, and hunted German fighters instead of merely defending bombers. Combat reports told of pursuits over 30 kilometers while German pilots broke off for fuel. Diaries admitted that the war has come to our doorstep. By February 25, 1944, during Operation Argument Big Week, the new escorts arrived in force. Over 1,000 bombers and 900 fighters, including 150 P-51Bs, struck aircraft factories across Germany. The Luftwaffe lost 355 fighters and roughly 100 irreplaceable veteran leaders in just 5 days, unraveling the mentor system that had sustained German tactics. 2 weeks later, on March 4, 1944, 660 American bombers reached Berlin with full escort. Galland himself reported being chased 50 kilometers by Mustangs that had fuel to spare, admitting they enjoyed altitude, speed, and tactical superiority. Civilians in the Reich capital watched American fighters fly unchallenged loops over the Brandenburg Gate. From that spring onward, the new pattern never relented. P-51s escorted then descended to strafe, destroying dozens of aircraft on the ground in minutes, turning German airfields into death traps. German pilot training, which had once provided 200 and 250 hours of flight time, collapsed to 110, 160 hours by late 1944, and in some 1945 cases as little as 80 hours, compared to 400 plus hours for US pilots. Fuel shortages, worsened by the May 1944 oil campaign that cut output from 180,000 tons in April to 20,000 by September, meant that many trainees never practiced high-altitude combat at all. Even advanced weapons could not reverse the trend. The Me-262 jet, capable of 540 miles per hour, appeared in mid-1944, but Mustang simply waited near its airfields to strike during vulnerable takeoffs and landings. Meanwhile, Allied production surged. The United States eventually built 15,586 P-51s, at one point finishing a complete Mustang every 90 minutes, and trained pilots at an unmatched scale. By war's end, the statistics were decisive. P-51s destroyed 4,950 enemy aircraft in the air and 4,131 on the ground, for a kill ratio of about 3.6 to 1, while Luftwaffe operational fighters dwindled from 1,600 in January 1944 to 325 by April 1945. Historians and the US Strategic Bombing Survey alike concluded that the P-51 Mustang, more than any other single weapon, secured Allied air superiority over Europe. By early 1944, the 8th Air Force had reorganized for an offensive that could only succeed with the P-51. The new escort strategy combined three critical elements. Deep range. Mustangs carried external fuel tanks and a high-efficiency laminar-flow wing, giving a combat radius of over 1,000 miles and total range exceeding 2,000 miles. Enough to accompany bombers from England to Berlin and back. High-altitude performance. With a Packard-built Merlin V1650 engine producing around 1,650 horsepower at altitude, the P-51 maintained 440 miles per hour at 30,000 feet and could climb at 3,400 plus feet per minute, matching or outpacing Bf-109GS and Fw-190AS. Heavy armament, 6 50 caliber Browning machine guns with nearly 1,900 rounds each allowed sustained, lethal fire, while the aircraft's 42,000 feet ceiling let it dictate engagements. These factors meant the bombers were no longer a moving target, waiting to be cut apart. The P-51 allowed American planners to resume and expand daylight bombing, now confident of escort protection all the way to the heart of the Reich. The strategic effect became visible during Operation Argument, Big Week, 20-25, February 1944. In 5 days, over 1,000 bombers and nearly 900 fighters, including about 150 P-51Bs, hit key aircraft production centers across Germany. The Luftwaffe lost about 355 fighters in those few days. Critically, roughly 100 veteran leaders, Staffelkapitani and Gruppenkommandeur, were killed. These leaders represented years of tactical experience and training capacity. Their loss caused a chain reaction. New pilots entered combat without proper mentorship, and unit cohesion eroded. The 8th Air Force, previously forced to pause long-range raids, was now free to target German aircraft factories, ball-bearing plants, and oil refineries with growing confidence. The psychological turning point followed quickly. On March 4, 1944, 660 American bombers struck Berlin itself, escorted by P-51s, P-38 Lightnings, and P-47 Thunderbolts. For the first time, Fighter Command protected bombers from takeoff to target and back. German air defense commanders found themselves outnumbered roughly 3-1 in the air. General Adolf Galland admitted afterward that the Mustangs possessed altitude, speed, and tactical superiority, and even described being chased 50 kilometers by 2 Mustangs that had ample fuel to play with him, like cats with a mouse. For Berliners who had long trusted official claims of air superiority, the sight of silver P-51s performing unchallenged loops above the Brandenburg Gate was shattering. The propaganda of the Luftwaffe's invincibility collapsed overnight. By April 1944, P-51 pilots had evolved their mission. Instead of merely guarding bomber formations, they swept ahead to hunt interceptors, and after bombing runs, descended to low altitude to strafe targets of opportunity. A dramatic example occurred on April 13, 1944, when 42 Mustangs from the 4th Fighter Group, after escorting bombers to Schweinfurt, attacked Bavarian airfields. In just 30 minutes, they destroyed 51 aircraft on the ground, damaged 23 more, killed or wounded dozens of ground personnel, and wrecked maintenance facilities. Airfields that had been safe once bomber streams passed were now dangerous, long after the last bomber had gone. The Luftwaffe's ability to replace losses collapsed in parallel. Early 1944, a typical new pilot logged 160-220 flight hours. Late 1944, training fell to 110-160 hours. Early 1945, some entered combat with as few as 80 total hours, many without high-altitude experience or live gunnery practice. By contrast, U.S. Army Air Force's pilots averaged over 400 hours of flight time before combat, including extensive formation flying and aerial gunnery. This 3- to 4-fold advantage in training time compounded the Mustang's technological edge, making even average American squadrons overwhelmingly effective. In May 1944, the Allies began a concentrated oil campaign. Strikes on synthetic fuel plants cut German aviation fuel production from about 180,000 tons in April to just 20,000 tons by September. The effects were swift and severe. Training flights were first limited and then canceled. Operational sorties were restricted to only the most critical missions. Jet units, including the promising Me-262, faced chronic fuel shortages. Meanwhile, P-51 groups began conducting offensive sweeps over Germany itself, loitering above airfields to intercept fighters during takeoff and landing. Unlimited Allied fuel meant they could wait out their opponents and strike at will. The Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighter, entering combat in mid-1944 with a top speed near 540 miles per hour, briefly raised German expectations, yet operational realities neutralized its advantage. Jets were most vulnerable during takeoff and landing, when Mustangs could easily intercept them. The Me-262's engines required replacement after only 10 to 25 hours of operation, and high-grade fuel was increasingly unavailable. Experienced pilots were too few to employ the jet effectively. Individual aces, such as Franz Schall and Georg Peter Eder, achieved double-digit victories, but these successes had no strategic effect. By autumn 1944, the P-51's mission expanded to Germany's transportation network. On September 11, 1944, 36 Mustangs of the 357th Fighter Group destroyed 81 locomotives in a single day. The same group ultimately recorded nearly 600 air-to-air victories, the highest of any Mustang group in the 8th Air Force. Reich Minister Albert Speer wrote that American fighters accomplished what bombers alone could not: systemic paralysis of coal, food, and parts distribution, crippling the German war economy. By early 1945, the Luftwaffe was exhausted. Morale crumbled. Many units ceased flying altogether. A last major effort, Operation Sonderkommando Elbe, on April 7, 1945, sent roughly 180 to 200 Bf 109s, many piloted by barely trained volunteers, in desperate ramming attacks against American bombers. It failed catastrophically. American fighters claimed 130 to 140 kills for minimal losses. Total wartime production and combat records tell the story. 15,586 P-51 Mustangs produced, 4,950 enemy aircraft destroyed in air combat, 4,131 destroyed on the ground, 2,520 Mustangs lost. Aerial kill ratio, roughly 3.6 to 1. The U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey later concluded that the P-51 fighter, more than any other single weapon, won air superiority over Europe. Former Luftwaffe aces agreed. Adolf Galland acknowledged that the Mustang's strength lay not in a single superior performance metric, but in balanced capabilities combined with overwhelming numbers, training, and industrial support. Günter Rall reflected in 1975 that the Americans were fighting a different war, one of systems, production, and strategic dominance, and they won. The Mustang's success thus demonstrated that modern air supremacy rests on integrated technology, industrial scale, and pilot preparation, not just on individual bravery or isolated technical brilliance. From the desperate losses of Schweinfurt and Regensburg to the unescorted victory rolls over Berlin, the P-51 Mustang marked the decisive turning point in the European air war. It was an aircraft conceived in just 102 days, powered by a British engine, mass-produced at one every 90 minutes, and flown by thoroughly trained pilots backed by the full economic might of the United States. By the time the Third Reich understood that the P-51 was not just another fighter, but the airborne expression of a vast industrial democracy, the Luftwaffe had already been broken. The hunters of 1940 had become the hunted of 1944, and the skies of Europe belonged decisively and permanently to the Mustang.